Every story of horror has a shadow story, the one told by those who lived through it. When a family is destroyed, the headlines focus on the killers, the motive, the shock. But the real story belongs to the people left standing in the ruins. The mothers, the daughters, the wives. Those who must find a way to keep breathing when the world has stopped making sense. For months we have examined two fathers who murdered their own children. But now we turn away from the killers. This final chapter belongs to the women who refused to let silence have the last word. The ones who carried unbearable loss yet still stood tall enough for the world to see what strength truly looks like. This is not about death. It's about survival. It's about what happens after the sirens fade, when cameras leave, when the crowds disperse, when grief becomes a daily companion. Because in the ashes of these stories, two women taught us something every true crime case tries to forget. That love does not end where tragedy begins. Before the world learned her name from news alerts, Shanann was simply a woman who believed in love, ambition, and possibility. Born in North Carolina, she carried the kind of determination that turned obstacles into goals. Friends describe her as radiant, not because her life was easy, but because she worked relentlessly to make it meaningful. She met Chris Watts online, and what followed looked like the modern version of a fairy tale. A beautiful wedding, a new house in Colorado, two daughters, Bella and Celeste, and the excitement of another baby, a boy they planned to name Nico. On social media, Shanann shared snippets of that joy. Morning giggles, bedtime songs, the pride of a growing family. But what the camera captured was only half the truth. Shanann was the heart of her household, the kind of mother who believed that positivity could fix almost anything. Even when money was tight, when her lupus flared up, when Chris grew distant, she smiled through it. She believed in fighting for her marriage because she saw family as sacred. In her eyes, love wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. And she never stopped trying. Her friends remember late-night messages where she confessed confusion. She didn't understand why Chris had become so cold. She sensed something was wrong. She just couldn't see how deep the fracture went. She asked, "Are you still in love with me?" He said yes, but his actions said no. Still, Shanann hoped, because hope was the only language she knew. In her final weeks, she planned gender reveal ideas, recorded sweet videos for Chris, and wrote long messages about rebuilding trust. She had no idea that behind her husband's quiet demeanor, a second life was unfolding, one filled with lies, secrecy, and betrayal. But the power of Shanann's story isn't in how it ended. It's in how she lived, fully, honestly, and with a heart that refused to harden. When tragedy took her life, her parents, Frank and Sandy Rzusek, promised that the world would remember her not as a victim, but as a mother who gave everything. They stood in court, voices shaking but steady, describing their daughter as someone whose kindness could light a room. Even in death, Shanann's strength became her legacy, because through her, millions of women saw themselves loving, forgiving, trusting, sometimes to a fault, and realized that strength doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means loving with your whole heart, even when the world tells you to give up. Shanann's life reminds us that visibility is not vanity. She shared her world online not to boast, but to inspire. She wanted people to believe that ordinary families could find joy despite illness, debt, or distance. And even now, years later, her videos serve a purpose her killer never imagined. They show us what real love looks like. Love in motion. Love that tried. Love that endures. For her parents, every day is still a battlefield between memory and pain. But when they speak her name, it is not through tears alone. It is through gratitude. Because Shanann's story, painful as it is, continues to save lives by reminding people to notice, to speak, and to listen when something feels wrong. Her light didn't fade in that Colorado home. It spread through advocacy, through awareness, through every person who now knows what hidden suffering can look like. And that is what makes her a symbol of strength, not tragedy. Shanann was many things: a mother, a wife, a businesswoman, a fighter. But in her final weeks, she became something she never wanted to be: a woman who sensed her world collapsing and couldn't stop it. People often look at tragedy and ask, didn't she see the signs? But love has its own blindness. Not ignorance, not denial, but faith. Faith that the person you built your life with would never become your undoing. Faith that love, history, and shared dreams still means something when things start to fall apart. Shanann saw changes. She noticed the small shifts, the unanswered texts, the distracted stares, the way Chris began to speak less and avoid touch. At first, she told herself he was just tired. Then, she worried it was stress. She never considered that the man she trusted completely could be hiding a double life. Her messages from that summer read like the diary of a woman trying to hold her family together with her bare hands. She writes about missing him, about how he no longer looks at her the same way. In one message to a friend, she confides, "I feel like I'm losing him, and I don't know why." But she doesn't give up. She plans date nights. She arranges family trips. She even records a video surprise to tell him she's pregnant with baby Nico. She's glowing, smiling, full of hope. The camera doesn't know it's capturing her last moment of pure joy. When Chris hugs her in that video, his face doesn't show excitement. It shows calculation. He already knows his life is moving in two directions, one toward the family he built and another toward the affair he hides. But Shanann's eyes are still full of belief. She doesn't see the stranger standing in front of her because she's too busy looking for the man she fell in love with. As the weeks pass, her health declines, her lupus flares, her sleep becomes restless. And through it all, she keeps fighting for her business, her children, her marriage. She's the one sending messages, initiating conversations, suggesting counseling. But love requires two willing hearts. And by then, Chris's heart is somewhere else. When she leaves for her business trip in early August, she texts him, "I love you. I hope you have a good night with the girls." His response is short, cold, even robotic. Still, she ends her message with a heart emoji, because that's who she was, hopeful to the end. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, later said Shanann seemed anxious that weekend. She worried Chris wouldn't answer her. When she came home, she felt something dark rising, not violence, but distance, the kind of emotional gap that turns love into silence. What Shanann didn't know was that silence was about to become permanent. And yet, her final acts were those of love. Coming home to her children, planning a doctor's visit, thinking about the future. Even when love betrayed her, she didn't betray love. In the end, Shanann's story reminds us that strength isn't about seeing danger and running. It's about walking toward love even when fear whispers that you shouldn't. Because that's what mothers do. They fight for their families until their very last breath. And while Chris's name became synonymous with betrayal, Shanann's became something far greater, a symbol of unwavering devotion. Her friends still say that if she had known the full truth, she would have forgiven him. Not because she was weak, but because forgiveness was in her nature. But what she didn't realize was that forgiveness can't save someone who no longer values life itself. Shanann couldn't escape what she couldn't imagine, but her story became a warning for every woman who senses something wrong and silences that voice out of love. She didn't die in ignorance. She died believing the goodness of someone who had already let that goodness die inside him. And for that, she will forever represent the courage of love in its purest, most tragic form. Shanann's parents once said, "Our daughter didn't lose her life because she was weak. She lost it because she was kind." And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. That kindness, in a world filled with cruelty, can make you both loved and vulnerable. But even now, years later, her kindness continues to change lives. Her story teaches the world that silence can kill, that manipulation hides in plain sight, and that awareness, not fear, is what keeps families safe. Shanann didn't see the storm coming, but her light still guides those lost in their own. That is her legacy. That is her victory. In Ohio, another mother faced a nightmare far worse than death, the agony of witnessing it unfold before her eyes. The woman who shared a home with Laura Doerman isn't a name most people know. She never stood before cameras. She never gave interviews. Her silence became her sanctuary, and that silence tells its own story, one of pain so deep that words would only cheapen it. On June 15th, 2023, the day began like any other. It was summer, hot, quiet, filled with the sound of children playing outside. Three brothers, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, laughed and argued and ran around the yard. Their mother was inside, probably doing what mothers do on an ordinary afternoon, folding laundry, making lunch, checking on her kids through the window. It was just another day in their small Ohio town. Until it wasn't. When the first gunshot echoed through the air, everything changed. The sound was so sharp, so out of place, that neighbors thought it had to be a car backfiring. But then came the second and the third, and the screams. She ran outside, a mother in disbelief, begging the universe to wake her up from the nightmare. But nightmares, when real, don't fade when you open your eyes. They deepen. What she saw next was something no one should ever see. Her children running for their lives. Her husband, the man she once loved, holding a rifle aimed at his own sons. It was chaos frozen in time, movement and stillness all at once. She screamed for him to stop. The words tore through her throat, but they didn't reach him. He wasn't listening. He wasn't even there, not the man she knew. What stood before her was something unrecognizable. Neighbors later told police they could hear her voice a blocks, pleading, begging, sobbing. Each scream a mother's prayer that went unanswered. She tried to reach the boys, but the gunfire was too quick, too relentless. By the time officers arrived, the unimaginable had already happened. The 911 call from that day captured not just panic, but heartbreak, raw, animal grief. She wasn't screaming for help anymore. She was screaming for time to turn back, for just one more chance to stop what she couldn't stop, for one more moment with her children alive. When deputies found her, she was on the ground, clutching one of the boys, shaking, covered in dust and tears. She had no words left, only the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time. People often call her the mother who survived, but that word, survived, doesn't feel right, because survival implies living, and what she's endured doesn't feel like life. It feels like endurance. Each morning since that day is another battle to breathe, another decision to keep going. She wakes up in a house that no longer feels like home, surrounded by memories that sting instead of soothe. The laughter is gone, but the echoes remain. The toys still sit where the boys left them. The walls still hold their handprints. The air still carries their voices if she listens hard enough. She doesn't talk much. Those who know her say she spends most days quietly, keeping herself, holding on to faith, trying to rebuild something that can never be whole again. Her silence isn't weakness. It's survival, because sometimes speaking the truth out loud makes it too real to bear. The neighbors who witnessed that day still say her courage was the only light in that horror. While chaos erupted, she never stopped running toward her children. She never stopped screaming their names. She fought until the last moment she could. And that's what makes her remarkable. Even when the world fell apart, her instinct as a mother didn't, not for a second. When she later appeared in court to face Chad, her expression said everything her words couldn't. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply stared at him. The man who took everything and left her with silence. That silence was her judgment, because no words could ever capture the gravity of his betrayal. Chad sat there motionless, avoiding her eyes. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't explain. He simply existed, a void where a father once stood. But she didn't need an explanation. Some acts are too monstrous for language. In the months that followed, she refused interviews, not because she was hiding, but because she had nothing left to prove. The media wanted her pain, but she chose dignity instead. The public wanted closure, but she knew closure is a myth. There's only endurance. At vigils, she stayed in the back, head lowered, surrounded by family. When candles were lit, she didn't speak. She just watched the light flicker against the dark, and maybe for a brief second, she imagined her boys in that glow, running free, laughing again, untouched by what had been done to them. That's what motherhood becomes after unimaginable loss. A ritual of remembering, a prayer made of tears and light. And though the world will never fully understand her silence, those who have lived through grief know exactly what it means. It's not surrender. It's strength. The quiet kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. If Shanann's story is about fighting until the end, The Ohio mother story is about surviving the unthinkable. Both women loved fiercely. Both believed in family. Both faced betrayal so deep that even words feel too small to describe it. But one was silenced, and the other learned to speak again through her pain. Together, they represent two sides of the same truth, that love and loss exist side by side, and even when love is destroyed, it still leaves a mark that can't be erased. When the world took everything from her, the one thing it couldn't take was her voice. At first, that voice was gone, swallowed by shock, buried under grief too heavy to name. But silence has limits. And when the time came for her to speak, the woman who once screamed in terror spoke again, this time with purpose. Months after the murders, she entered the courtroom. The walls were cold, the cameras waiting. Across the room sat the man she had once called her husband. He wore prison clothes, his wrists bound, his eyes dull and empty. She sat just feet away, surrounded by family and police officers. No sound in that room was louder than the quiet that followed when she stood to speak. Her statement wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Every word carried the weight of 3 small lives that would never grow up. Her voice trembled at first, not from fear, but from the force of memory. Then it steadied in that still room. Her words became a kind of prayer, a mother's eulogy disguised as testimony. She spoke their names, Clayton, Hunter, Chase, slowly, as if calling them back from somewhere beyond reach. She talked about their laughter, their games, their tiny hands that once held hers. She said they were my babies, my world. And for the first time since the shooting, the courtroom felt human again. Even the deputies looked away, blinking back tears. There was no hatred in her voice, only heartbreak, pure, unfiltered, endless heartbreak. She didn't ask for revenge. She didn't demand explanations. Because when someone destroys everything you love, no punishment feels like justice. The only thing that matters is that the world remembers who was lost. Her statement spread beyond that courthouse. News outlets replayed her words on television and online. But what moved people wasn't the tragedy. It was her composure. The strength it takes to stand where your children once stood and still speak with love instead of rage. Viewers around the world called her the strongest mother they'd ever seen. But strength is a misleading word. She didn't choose strength. She chose survival. She spoke not because she was ready, but because silence would have betrayed them. At the same time, thousands of miles away, Shanann and Watts' parents watched the coverage. They knew that pain. They knew what it meant to sit in a courtroom, surrounded by cameras, and speak about a child who would never come home. Different families, different states, the same broken silence. When Sandy was sick, Shanann's mother once stood before the court. Her voice carried the same tone, sorrow wrapped in dignity. She said, "My daughter loved him so much, and he took her from us." That echo connects both women forever. Two mothers separated by distance but united by grief. One spoke for her lost daughter, the other for her lost sons. And both reminded the world that love can still speak after violence tries to silence it. After the hearing, the Ohio mother didn't address reporters. She walked out quietly, escorted by deputies, her head slightly bowed. But as she passed the hallway lined with journalists and strangers, one thing became clear. She didn't need the cameras to tell her story. Her strength had already spoken for her. Later, in letters read by friends, she thanked the community for their support. She said she prays every day, not only for her children, but for peace, the kind that allows her to breathe again without guilt. She knows peace won't mean forgetting. It will mean remembering without collapsing. At night, she still keeps their rooms as they were. The blankets still folded, the drawings still taped to the walls. Every item a quiet conversation with ghosts. She talks to them sometimes, in whispers, in thoughts, in prayers. And maybe, in those moments, the world feels a little less empty. Her voice did more than honor her sons. It awakened people. In communities across Ohio, candlelight vigils turn into conversations about family mental health, about anger, about noticing when someone begins to fall apart. People began asking questions they had never asked before, not about crime, but about prevention. How do we help before tragedy happens? How do we listen when someone seems too quiet? How do we reach the fathers who are unraveling inside their own minds? That is what her voice accomplished, not just remembrance, but awareness. A ripple effect born from one woman's courage to speak truth after horror. The day Chad Doerman was sentenced, the courtroom filled again. He said little, almost nothing. But when the judge asked if he had anything to say, he whispered, "No." The silence that followed wasn't his victory. It was hers. Because in that silence, the only words that mattered were the ones spoken by the woman who refused to disappear. Her voice didn't bring justice. Nothing could, but it brought humanity back to a place that had lost it. It reminded everyone listening that grief can be powerful without being loud, and that sometimes the quietest people are the ones carrying the heaviest truths. In every story of tragedy, there's a voice that breaks the silence. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's a scream. Sometimes it's a trembling sentence in a courtroom that forces the world to stop and listen. This was that voice. And because of it, her children's names will never vanish into statistics. They live in her words, in the memories she keeps alive, in the way strangers now hold their own children a little tighter after hearing her story. She didn't speak for pity. She spoke for love. And that makes her not just a survivor, but the heart of this entire story. After every tragedy, there's a choice: to disappear into grief or to stand inside it and make meaning from the pain. Most people can't imagine the second option, but some families do. And when they do, they show us the rarest kind of courage, the courage to speak when silence would be easier. In the months following the murders, Shanann and Watts' parents, Frank and Sandy Uzasek, found themselves living in a world that didn't make sense anymore. Their daughter, their grandchildren, their unborn grandson, all gone. The laughter that once filled their phone calls had been replaced by interviews, police statements, and court dates. Yet, even through unbearable loss, they refused to let Shanann's story end with her death. They appeared in court to face Chris. When Sandy spoke, her voice trembled, but her words cut through the air like truth itself. She said, "My daughter loved you with all her heart, and you took her from us." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of love betrayed. Frank, quiet and stoic beside her, spoke too. He talked about Bella and Cece, about their energy, their laughter, their songs. He reminded the court that they weren't just victims. They were children full of dreams. And he asked the one question that no one could answer: how could you do that to them? The room fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. In that silence, everyone understood something that no verdict could explain. That grief, when spoken aloud, is the most honest language on earth. After the trial, the Uzaseks didn't fade away like so many families do after headlines move on. They spoke publicly about domestic control, emotional manipulation, and the warning signs that can hide inside perfect relationships. They didn't want sympathy. They wanted awareness. Sandy said in an interview, "If talking about Shanann helps even one person leave a dangerous situation, then her life still has purpose." That sentence became their mission. They began working with survivor networks, supporting laws that protect victims of domestic violence, and promoting awareness about how isolation, gaslighting, and emotional withdrawal often precede tragedy. In every word, they carried Shanann's legacy, not as a headline, but as a heartbeat that refuses to stop. They even built an online foundation dedicated to honoring Shanann and the children, not just as victims, but as symbols of compassion, strength, and love. The foundation raises awareness, shares educational resources, and helps families recognize manipulation before it's too late. Each post, each shared story is a digital candle, a light refusing to go out. In Ohio, something similar happened. The Doerman family and their neighbors turned their grief into unity. The mother, too broken to attend the first vigils, stayed home while the community gathered. They lit candles, held signs with the boys' names, and tied ribbons to trees along the street where it happened. One by one, people stood up to speak. Teachers, classmates, parents, friends. They described Clayton's leadership, Hunter's laughter, and Chase's boundless energy. They remembered the boys for how they lived, not how they died. When she finally did appear at Memorial weeks later, the mother didn't speak on stage. She stood in the back, holding a candle, tears running silently down her face. But her presence alone said everything. A mother still standing after the storm, surrounded by love instead of darkness. People turned to her not with pity, but with respect, because surviving what she survived was its own form of defiance. The community of Monroe Township changed after that. Parents held their children closer. Teachers noticed the quiet ones a little more. Neighbors checked in on each other. They learned what no one wants to learn, that evil can live in familiar places, and that love must be louder than fear. The parallels between the Rizou sex and the Doerman family are haunting and beautiful all at once. Two different families, two different tragedies, but one shared truth. Silence cannot protect anyone. Both refused to let grief become isolation. Both spoke, acted, and remembered, and both turned personal horror into public awareness. Through interviews, vigils, and quiet moments of advocacy, they taught others that remembrance is a form of resistance. It tells the world, you try to destroy love, but love is still here. In Colorado, strangers from around the world began visiting Shanann's memorial site. People left flowers, letters, even children's toys. In Ohio, ribbons and drawings appeared in school hallways, each one saying, "We remember." For both families, these gestures weren't just sympathy. They were proof that goodness still exists, that even after evil, humanity rises again. When asked how they keep going, Sandy Rizusek once said, "We live for them now. That's all we can do." And that's what both families continue to do, live for the ones they lost. They can't rewrite the past, but they can shape what comes after. They can teach. They can warn. They can love harder than the darkness that try to take everything. Because grief doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it speaks. And when it does, the world listens. The world doesn't move on from stories like these. Not really. The headlines may fade, but the echoes remain in posts, in videos, in late-night conversations between people who never even met the victims yet still feel connected to them. In the years since the Watts murders and in the months after the Doerman tragedy, social media became more than a news feed. It became a memorial ground. People who never knew Shanann or her children began posting tributes, art, and videos in their honor. Some lit candles at home. Some created digital memorials, turning pain into purpose. Others shared Shanann's old Facebook lives, her cheerful voice now sounding like a message from a different world. A reminder that light existed before the darkness. Every time her videos are shared, her laughter echoes again. Every time someone writes, "Rest in peace, Shanann," they're not just remembering her, they're keeping her alive. Because memory is the only antidote to erasure. In Colorado, the house where the murders happened was eventually emptied, sold, and changed hands, but its story never really left. For some, it became a place of curiosity. For others, reverence. Yet the true memorial wasn't made of walls. It lived in people's hearts. Neighbors, friends, and strangers from around the world all found themselves carrying a piece of that loss, turning it into awareness. Documentaries were produced, podcasts dissected every message, and YouTube channels, like this one, helped millions process the story not as gossip, but as human tragedy. Through these retellings, Shanann's voice gained new power. People began talking more about emotional abuse, about control, about recognizing when love turns one-sided. Her name became part of a larger conversation, one that saves lives quietly, one viewer at a time. That's the strange, bittersweet thing about public memory. It hurts to see tragedy revisited again and again, but it also means the world refuses to forget. And in remembrance, healing takes its first breath. In Ohio, the aftermath was different. The Doerman family story didn't travel the world the same way. It wasn't dissected by talk shows or documentaries, but struck deep in the communities that knew them. Teachers organized classroom memorials. Small businesses raised money to support the surviving mother. And local families began opening up about their own struggles, mental health, anger, loneliness. That's how remembrance transforms into action. It takes the unimaginable and turns it into something useful. It teaches empathy, even through horror. For those who survived that day, especially the neighbors and emergency responders, healing didn't come easily. Many attended therapy, some still do, because witnessing that kind of pain leaves invisible scars. But when they talk about the boys, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, they smile first before the tears come, because they remember their laughter, not just their loss. That, too, is a form of healing. Across the internet, true crime audiences began to evolve. People started looking beyond the killers and asking different questions. What about the families? What can we learn from them? How can we prevent the next tragedy? Those questions changed the tone of the entire conversation. Instead of sensationalizing pain, creators, journalists, and viewers began focusing on empathy, prevention, and awareness. It's no longer about watching the monster. It's about understanding the victims and the survivors who live after the monsters are gone. And that shift, that quiet change in perspective, is part of Shanann's legacy, part of the Ohio mothers too, because their stories taught people that the only way to defeat darkness is to shine light where it hides. Every year, people still post tributes on the anniversaries. Photos of Bella and Cece, of Clayton and Hunter and Chase, of Shanann smiling in the sunlight. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Shanann and hashtag Remember the Doerman Boys continue to circulate, not as trends, but as tiny acts of remembrance. They are digital flowers laid at a virtual grave, small gestures that carry immense love. And that's what memory does best. It turns pain into connection. It transforms isolation into community. It keeps the stories of the innocent from being buried beneath the crimes that took them. Public memory is powerful because it reminds us who we are when tragedy tries to make us forget. It reminds us that humanity still cares, still feels, still mourns together. When people remember Shanann's kindness, they are reminded to be kinder. When they remember the courage of the Ohio mother, they are reminded to cherish their children, to check in on loved ones, to never take time for granted. Each share, each post, each tribute, it's more than content. It's resistance. It's the world saying, we see you, we remember you, you mattered. And for families like the Zuseks and the Doermans, that's everything. Because grief doesn't end when justice is served. It ends, or rather, softens, when the world keeps saying the names of the people they loved. In the end, the internet didn't just preserve their stories. It amplified them. It gave the victims what their killers tried to take, permanence. And through that permanence, it gave their families a reason to keep speaking. Because as long as people keep remembering, love keeps winning. Motherhood begins with a heartbeat, not the child's, but the mother's. It's the rhythm that promises safety, warmth, and devotion before the world even sees a face. That's what both Shanann Watts and the Ohio mother shared, a bond that existed long before tragedy, and that somehow continues long after. To be a mother is to wake up tired and still smile. It's to give more than you have, to love without measure, to hold tiny hands that make you believe in miracles. It's also to fear, constantly, quietly, that one day you won't be there to protect them. But what neither of these women ever feared was betrayal from within their own home. That's the cruelty of their stories. Their danger came not from the world, but from the person they trusted most. When people speak about Shanann Watts, they talk about her energy, how she juggled motherhood, business, and chronic illness, how she turned exhaustion into motivation. She wasn't just a mom, she was a teacher, a nurse, a counselor, a protector. Her daughters were the center of her universe, and she shaped her world around them. Even in her final weeks, she still packed their snacks with care, recorded their laughter, and planned their next family trip. That's what motherhood does. It keeps building even when everything else begins to fall apart. Shanann didn't know her time was running out, but she lived every moment as if love alone could keep the world spinning. And maybe in a way it did, because her love still spins in the memories of everyone who knew her. Her parents say that when they look at pictures of Bella and Cece, they see Shanann spark in their smiles. The girls may be gone, but the joy they learned from their mother is still visible in those photos. Frozen moments of pure light. It's proof that love leaves traces that even death can't erase. In Ohio, another form of motherhood emerged, quieter, broken, but no less powerful. The woman who survived Chad Doerman's rampage became a mother in absence. Her arms are empty now, yet she still holds her children every day in her mind. Each sunrise is a reminder of what she's lost, but also what she refuses to give up, the will to keep living. For her, survival isn't strength in the way people imagine it. It's endurance. It's waking up every morning when there's no reason to. It's learning to breathe through pain, so heavy it feels like weight on her chest. It's folding clothes that will never be worn again and finding a kind of peace in the act itself. Those who know her say she still talks to her sons, in whispers and prayers, sometimes out loud when she's alone. She believes they can hear her. Maybe she's right, because a mother's voice doesn't end at the edge of the grave. It lingers, calling softly through the spaces between life and memory. Both women embody two different kinds of strength. Shanann's was bright and visible, the strength of optimism, of constant giving, of faith in love. The Ohio mother's is shadowed, the strength of survival, of refuse and collapse, of breathing through silence. One lived her strength in front of the world. The other lives hers quietly, out of sight, but both represent the same truth. Motherhood is unbreakable. Even when their families were destroyed, their identities as mothers never vanished. Shanann's parents say she died trying to protect her children. The Ohio mother lived because she tried to save hers. Love was her final act, one in defiance, one in endurance. And in that, they are forever connected. It's easy to look at stories like these and see only tragedy. But when you look closer, you see a resilience hiding underneath the pain. You see the small acts of love that survive the horror. A mother keeping her child's room untouched, a father reading bedtime stories to photographs, a community saying the children's names every year. Those are the miracles that grow in the ruins. Motherhood doesn't end when the child is gone. It becomes memory. It becomes advocacy. It becomes a quiet promise whispered into the air. I will carry you as long as I live. That's what Shanann's mother does every day. That's what the Ohio mother does in her silence. And that's what every grieving parent learns. That love is the one thing the world can't take away. In every vigil, every candlelight glow, every social media post that says we remember, their love echoes back. It says, you mattered, you still matter. Because motherhood is not defined by the years you get. It's defined by the depth of love you give. Both of these women gave everything. And even though their stories broke hearts across the world, they also reminded millions of what love really means. To give, to protect, to endure. That is the legacy of motherhood. Not the tragedy that ended their families, but the love that refuses to end with them. The story of Chris Watts and Chad Doerman began with horror, but it ends here with remembrance. Because the only way to defeat evil is to refuse to let it define the ending. 6 children lost their futures. 3 mothers lost their babies. 2 families were torn apart forever. And yet out of that wreckage, something still lives. Love. Love that refuses to vanish. Love that turns pain into purpose. The Watts family will forever be remembered through Shanann's laughter, Bella's songs, Cece's energy, and the quiet hope of baby Nico, who never saw the world. Their story has become a mirror, one that forces people to look at what lies beneath the surface of perfect photos and smiling posts. But it's also a light, because through their loss, thousands have learned to notice, to speak, to intervene when something feels wrong. Shanann's parents often say that if their story saves just one life, then their daughter's voice still echoes for a reason. And it does. The Doerman family carries that same legacy. Clayton, the protector. Hunter, the connector. Chase, the joy. 3 brothers bound by love, now remembered through every candle, every prayer, every stranger who whispers their names. Their mother's silence became a message louder than words, a reminder that grief can be graceful and that love can still exist even after the unthinkable. When you look at these families side by side, Colorado and Ohio, 2 ordinary American homes, you realize the same truth. Tragedy doesn't live in one place. It hides in plain sight. It lives in moments of neglect, in unspoken pain, in the masks people wear look fine while falling apart inside. But what also lives there, quietly and steadfast, is love, the kind that never leaves, even when everything else does. For Shanann's parents, love means speaking her name out loud, again and again, until the world remembers who she was beyond the crime. For the Ohio mother, love means surviving, because her sons deserve a mother who keeps breathing, even if it hurts. For both, Love means choosing life, even when it feels impossible. And maybe that's the hardest kind of courage, to live after love has been shattered and still believe in it anyway. Every tragedy carries lessons. The Watts case reminds us that control can wear a smile, that manipulation can hide behind kindness, and that the signs of danger are often emotional before they ever become physical. The Doerman case reminds us that mental collapse can turn ordinary lives into storms within seconds, and that help must come long before a breaking point. Together, they teach us that awareness saves lives, that we cannot stay silent, because silence is what evil wants: indifference, distraction, forgetting. But love, remembrance, and empathy, those are what bring the light back. When the world remembers these families, it doesn't remember the killers. It remembers the children who laughed, the mothers who loved, and the families who refused to let darkness write their final chapter. That's the legacy that survives. Not the violence, but the voices that rose from it. Voices that said, "We will not be erased." Some stories change laws. Others change hearts. This one did both. Every viewer who heard Shanann's voice, who saw the courage of the Ohio mother, carries a piece of that change now. Every person who listens learns and loves a little harder because of them. They keep those families alive in ways that matter, because memory is the opposite of death, and compassion is the quiet revolution that evil never expects. Their voices live on. This series was never about killers. It was about the families they tried to erase, and the love that refused to disappear. If you watched all the way here, take a moment. Remember Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico. Remember Clayton, Hunter, and Chase. Their lives mattered. Their laughter mattered. And their stories remind us that darkness wins only when good people stop paying attention. If these episodes made you pause, talk about them. Share what you learned with someone you love. Be the person who notices the quiet signs of pain. That's how awareness begins, one conversation at a time. And if you believe, as we do, that truth should never fade into silence, then stay with us. Subscribe to Dark Truths, true crime stories, so their voices keep reaching the world. Because every view, every comment, every shared moment of reflection helps light another candle against the dark. Until next time, thank you for listening, for remembering, and for proving that love always speaks louder than fear. This has been Dark Truths.